conversations up until now have been around leadership. And I want to take it back a little bit and to talk about partnership, because this is such a big problem that I think partnership is really one of the key parts to solving this. So that's what we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so on. By way of introduction, as Margaret said, I'm the leader of the Salesforce in Ireland. Salesforce is a 23-year-old company. We're a values-driven company. We started just over 2 decades ago. And we set about to change the software industry, because the software industry at that stage was very undemocratic, in that only enterprise-level software was only available to the biggest enterprises and the ones that could afford it. And we set about to democratize it by delivering it as a service, as a cloud, what's now cloud computing, but software as a service at the time. So we feel that we've been part of that democratization. And it also means that we've been very close to our communities. We've been embracers of stakeholder capitalism right since the very start. And I think that, now as we get into this existential issue of climate, that these level of partnerships and this stakeholder involvement, I think, is key to the solutions. So that's what we want to talk about this morning. And just to join me on the panel, I'm going to introduce John McNamara, who's the head of sustainability at Board Mona. And, Board Mona have been driving this, and, John will talk about that later on. So thank you for being here, and excited for your role at Board Mona. And then Andrea, I'm going to introduce Andrea Carroll, who's the head of sustainability at DAA. And again, a very diverse group of stakeholders. I'm going to talk about, all of the stakeholders in Andrea's space. Mary Rose is the CEO of Dublin Chamber of Commerce. And, we know each other, Mary Rose, from a long time before. But again, such a diverse group of stakeholders and such a big influence. So much of the country's power and influence is in your space. So thank you for being here. And then Barry McDermott, who is the head of sustainability at PM Group. And PM Group are so involved. They're an Irish company of almost 40 years standing now. And have been so involved in the built environment, not just in Ireland, but around the world. So that's our panel, and that's what we're going to talk about. Just before I start, to Mark Foley, who was here before me, Mark, I just want to say, if there's an undivided way of getting my attention, on your second bullet point was CRM performance. Our stock symbol, our ticker symbol is CRM, so I was very interested to hear what you're going to say about our business performance, so thank you for that. So let me just start off by talking about the role of stakeholders and the engagement with stakeholders. And John, I'm going to ask you this, first of all. How does Board Mona, how did you look to engage with your stakeholders? How do you identify your stakeholders, and who are they?
Yeah, thank you, David. I suppose in the first instance, the stakeholder mapping across both the value chain and our activities. Okay, and what I mean by that is looking at the infrastructural work that we do and the operational work that we do. And I suppose the reason for this is critical. We need to have a social license to operate. This is very much dependent on our reputation. It's making sure we bring our stakeholders on the journey with us, and we've had a roller coaster of a journey over the last 4 to 5 years, but even going back in time over our history as we've developed out from the 30s, 40s, the provision of energy, going from just taking peat, extracting peat, into renewable energy, into recycling, into peatlands rehabilitation. And I suppose we start by looking at our employees, we look at our customers, our suppliers, we look at, very important given the nature of the work that we're in, our regulators, the statutory bodies that we must consult with, also the local authorities, representative bodies, and the local communities. And I suppose looking at that, it's different methods, different media, different fora is required when dealing with the different stakeholders in giving your message. This being a perfect example. Some of our infrastructural projects go from literally a leaflet to a town hall to a website. Similarly, when dealing with the peatlands rehabilitation, can't be 2-letter on the door. Somewhat constrained during COVID, but making calls, our community liaisons officers out there all the time explaining and clearly communicating what our vision is, and importantly, for some projects, what it isn't, which is very important that people don't get misconceived ideas about what the project is that you're working with. So I suppose, unfortunately, with stakeholder engagement, there is no silver bullet. It's horses for courses, it's face-to-face meetings, it's wearing out shoe leather, it's using technology. It's the whole amalgam put together in terms of communicating what you want to do, why you want to do it, and what you're not doing. So I think that...
Yeah, and I suppose that it comes back to really, it's ultimately what this panel is about. It's about the partnership, because we're all in this together.
Exactly.
And I think then, Andrea, if you look at your stakeholders, they're so disparate. I mean, you go from separate from your own airports, you're involved in 21 different airports around the world.
23 different airports globally, yeah.
So there's just such a disparate group of stakeholders there. How do you engage with them, and how do you identify them, and how do you bring them with you?
It's really challenging on this topic. I guess to date we've been very much focused on Dublin Airport as our flagship within Ireland, and as a commercial semi-state, we have to report back to stakeholders who are regulators and government departments, and the customer, who obviously, as we've all seen over the last few weeks, are very vocal when we don't get it right. So very much focused on the airport. However, as DAA Group, we also have an obligation to look at the wider impact that we have. So we also own ARI, who are retailers, and they operate in many different airports globally. We have a management and consultancy arm who operate again globally in different airports as well. We have a property service that lives on the campus, and we also manage Cork Airport. So within that, I guess, because we're a commercial semi-state, my approach was nearly to look at this in two ways. I had come directly from Amazon before I came into this, so very much focused on commercial and how we can develop in a corporate way, and how we engage our stakeholders in that way. So looking at supply chain, nearly forgetting that when you go into public sector, it's massively more complex than that. So a lot of the same approaches or issues that John has raised there, we would nearly have to have two arms. So we have to deal with our commercial interests very differently to how we deal with our public sector interests. However, that's not to say that there isn't overlap or there isn't benefit of that. And I think that combining those benefits or those approaches is really useful. But we do have to, there's more hand-holding, or there's more different communications, there's different approaches that are dependent on who you're working with. The other challenge for us is that we're effectively national infrastructure, and we're national infrastructure of importance. And we facilitate commercial activity, and commercial activity can be very vocal or very changeable in the way that absolutely they should be. They should be able to react to market demands. We can't always react to market demands in very different ways. So sometimes we are banging heads with our stakeholders, so it can get very fraught or very difficult, but that doesn't mean that you give up on this issue. You have to find ways for partnership, and from my perspective, my whole focus is on developing a sustainability strategy for DAA. So it's incredibly important that we work within the supply chain and within our within the stakeholders, no matter how challenging it's been in the past.
And it's interesting, but and Mary Rose, if we move to your space, then so much of your cohort is a voluntary connection. You know, you don't have the mandatory, you can't force, because you're not necessarily buyers. People join the chamber, you know, on a voluntary basis. So how do you bring them with you, you know, that group who can walk from you at any stage?
Yeah, I suppose in line with chambers pretty much in the English-speaking world, we're what's called private law chambers, so voluntary membership and literally renewed every year. So everything we do is in a spirit of partnership, which you'd expect with the membership body. But then we also, our primary function is to lobby and advocate on behalf of the business community. And we do that to government, national and local, and all of its agencies. So we work in partnership then with some agencies. For example, we're in partnership with CODEMA, which is Dublin's energy agency, and we're part of Zero Together, which is a partnership, a very unique partnership organisation that's about creating a clean and healthy future for Dublin. And that's a collaboration or partnership with industry, transport, local authorities and communities and academia. So that's just one example of how we would work on most projects, would be very much in partnership. On sustainability in specific, we then have Sustainability Academy, which we develop in partnership with experts in the area, and that's sponsored by and supported and facilitated by AIB, who actively get involved in the design but also in the delivery of the programme, which is to help members move from awareness to action in their own ESG journey. And then we're part of an international network through Eurochamp and also the International Chamber of Commerce network, and through them influenced through the UN, and we would be signatories and signed up to the UN Special Sustainable Development Goals, with particular focus on 5 of them around sustainable cities, around decent work and economic growth, around gender diversity, around climate action, and there's 5 of them. You always forget one once you start: industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So all of those elements, there's partnerships, there's committee structures, there's working with stakeholders. And as anybody who works with the group of stakeholders, and all of us do, it's very often 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's go around the houses. It's always around communication. It's around trying to understand what is the common goal. So, for instance, in that Zero Together, it's around a zero carbon future together. So all of the different stakeholders have different objectives, but there is one common goal, and everyone has other sub-agendas, but it's finding that one common goal that we can coalesce around and leave the other agendas outside the room for that particular discussion or debate to move forward on that one shared goal.
And then, Barry, in your case, the stakeholders are often at a remove, because you're in the built infrastructure and engineering and design and eventually through the project management, but the stakeholders may not necessarily be your stakeholders in the first instance. They're your customer stakeholders. So does that add an extra complication into your business, because it has such a long-term effect what you deliver?
Yeah, we're in the middle of reviewing our group sustainability strategy at the moment. So literally in the last few weeks, we've been doing stakeholder engagement pieces for our own brand, for our own company. So our key stakeholders will be our employees, the supply chain that we use to deliver projects to our clients, and then the clients ourselves. Now, the clients have their own stakeholders in the sense that we design and deliver buildings. So the people, buildings are for people. So the spaces that we design are effectively for their own stakeholders. So listening to the client feedback is probably our principal stakeholder, really, from a business model, and just understanding the engineering designs and architecture that we need to deliver. And I suppose we're hearing the feedback. We do it through a materiality assessment, and we try to prioritize what the key themes are from that. And diversity and inclusion is a key theme in not just in the delivery teams, but in the business model that we have. But also, I think the key, 2 of the other key ones are environmental sustainability, carbon and climate. That's predominantly the focus of the supply chain and our clients, and how they can address their corporate environmental sustainability goals. So we have to, and the feedback we're getting is we have to provide innovative design solutions for them to achieve their UN Sustainable Development Goals, particularly around climate and carbon. So that's principally where we're sort of getting the feedback on. So that's what we have to bring as a brand to it when we do engineering design. What sustainability solutions can we give? How can we make the decisions of our clients easier in that regard, particularly when they're dealing with capital investment decisions on buildings?
It's interesting that the one thing that's common across here is the UN SDGs, and sometimes is there a risk that we can hide behind those a little bit? The 17 US Sustainable Development Goals and whatever number of sub goals there are behind it, but there's no sustainability report or target that doesn't have them in it someplace. So can we hide behind them a little bit, do you think, John? Or, how do we break them down into where the rubber hits the road in your communities?
I think we shouldn't see them as an end in themselves. They're guiding principles, okay, in terms of, Barry mentioned the materiality assessment. Our organisation is different from Barry's, it's different from Andrea's. So they work as a way to develop your reporting and your strategy, I think, in the first instance. I think, a bottom-up approach, just simply trying to score against the UN development goals, is probably really a tick-the-box exercise. They should be used as a guidance and a framework to build your strategy from the top down in the first instance, and then your metrics and your monitoring and your KPIs and your target setting from the bottom up, but not an end in their own right.
Well, what about this whole thing around transparency and around how we report on it? And let's stay with you on this, John, because it's a big factor for the transparency, and we're trying to bring the world with us,
Yeah.
our communities with us. and there's always the risk that we can be accused of greenwashing or of some sort of numbers washing.
I'll go back 600 years. The Italian monk, I think it was Luca Pacioli, started double entry accounting and put accountancy on the sort of convention and the setting that we have today. Yeah, and I know there's a number of accountants in the room who may take a little bit of umbrage to this, but in essence, accountancy and is really looking after one particular company metric, the financial health of the organization. Okay, that's really what the accountancy is looking at. I think in 2021, the Reporting Exchange organization indicated there was over 650 different reporting around the broader ESG. Okay, and that's a problem. All right, but they've grown in the last 20 years now. It's competing with traditional financial accounting that's over 600 years old. But what's happening is you're seeing the legislators, particularly the European Union, look at the Green Deal, look at bridging the objectives and the goals in, say, COP into linking that to investment decisions in the real world, okay? And what we're seeing is from the Green Deal is flowing out of that, you have the NFRD, the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, transitioning to a much more meaty and all-encompassing CSRD in the next couple of years. More recently, this year, we've seen companies begin to report on the taxonomy. And to your point, I think on the taxonomy, we now have, I think it's 167 economic activities defined in law by the European Union as making an economic contribution to environmental sustainability. And I think that's a dividing line in the sense that it's now binary if you're making a decision. And for organizations like ourselves, you look at taxonomy, you look at CapEx, that's taxonomy eligible. This year, we're looking at last financial year, probably 92% of the 50 odd million CapEx that we've invested will be deemed, not by ourselves, but under the legislation as being taxonomy aligned or making a substantial contribution to in environmental goals. So I think from that point of view, flowing from the legislation, you will find less room for, shall we say, creative narratives around greenwashing. Now, I very much take the point. This is quite a sea change, quite a paradigm shift in how organizations are going to report the resources that's needed and how stakeholders interpret these, because these are new and these are going to accompany it. But I think they're going to be maybe not as important yet as the financial reporting or on the financial health of organizations, but you're going to see investors, stakeholders, broader society look at corporates through a lens that's measuring more than just their financial health. And I think having a common language, having a common taxonomy around what's environmentally sustainable, I think will certainly help in that space. But it's going to take some time, and we're at the beginning of that sort of reporting journey at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's actually 2 points in that. One is the common language, and this as we get into the space of sustainability, there's just a danger we're completely awash with TLAs, with too many acronyms, and it just gets very confusing. But it's not going to go away. We need to understand the complex issues behind them. And then from our point of view, like, I was delighted that Salesforce is a net zero company now. We were since 2021. But I just looked at our reporting. Our stakeholder report is 16 pages of those reports. And I think for everybody who's involved here, the whole complexity of reporting is the challenge. And Barry, in your space, I saw that you delivered 15 lead or 15 projects of your 2021 projects were in the lead space. So, I mean, how do you report, and how are you transparent on something that you deliver in 5 or 6 or 7 years' time? Is that a challenge for PM Group?
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly filling out pre-qualification frameworks and sustainability questionnaires for clients. The corporates are pushing it down through their supply chain, and from EcoVadis to CDP to clients' own standards. There's a lot of questionnaires to fill in the space. So we're having to report our performance on this a lot. And I think the creative narrative was a good term, because there's no third-party auditing of any of these responses. So even when we report on these things, I think there's a trust-based system. And so it's great to see that the corporate reporting sustainability directive, when it comes in, will bring some element of scrutiny to that, because your CFO now has to sign off on that. And, accountants don't do creative narrative, generally, in my experience. So that will bring a degree of more scrutiny and verification to it. In terms of the lead, our clients in their engineering standards are now trying to beef up their specifications for their own buildings. And LEED is a sustainability assessment scheme. It's North American, it's globally recognized, and it's a significant challenge to find people to deliver on that in the world we operate, because it's complex manufacturing that we do. But it's delivering those lead projects and reporting on them, we use that as a way to demonstrate to our stakeholders that we've encouraged the client to go down this road. We've shown them that it's not a capital cost burden as it's often been projected in the past. It's actually it's an efficient thing. So we generally push it on all of our clients, and it's great to see that our clients, many of our top clients, are now putting that into their engineering standards. So it's a minimum requirement of a building to be delivered to have LEED for them. So it's a positive for us to sort of embrace LEED, and it's a great way to show that we can deliver a sustainable building.
And I think that probably for everybody in the audience today, I think a key part of this is this transparency around the reporting, so that we know that what I'm saying is the same as what you're saying, or what Mary Rose is saying, that there's no wriggle room, if you like, that these are signed off with the same rigor as an accounting audit.
Well, the US Green Building Council has to approve all of the LEED buildings, so it's a third-party verification anyway. So that's.
So I want to just change a little bit, because if you look, sometimes companies like ours can be a little bit privileged in that maybe we're doing well and we can become early net zero because of our business circumstances. But then that brings in scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon. And scope 1 and 2, if you like, is the sort of comfortable place for everybody. It's the stuff we can sort of control relatively easy. But then you get into scope 3, which impacts everybody else, because this is for me to be net zero, or my business to be net zero, I'm bringing in my partners, I'm bringing in those I do business with, and I'm bringing them in as a scope 3 source for me in my value chain, up or downstream on the value chain. So how do we bring those scope 3 partners with us? And, Andre, we talked about this last night, and your scope 3 was probably the most interesting. There's just such a diverse range of people who fall into that space. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, it probably actually aligns with what we have been talking about around transparency and not hiding behind what's been said. Interestingly, I've been in sustainability for my whole career, and early on, I think a lot of businesses didn't really know where to put me, and I was often put in with marketing because it was about language and it was about what were we saying in this. More and more these days, I'm working with accountants and finance people, which is great. It's such a shift. It's really nice to see that. But part of what I suppose I'm trying to get across then is that there's different types of language that we use, there's different types of language and commitments that our partners have made, and we have to be respectful and aware of what they mean. So you've mentioned net zero already. There's different understanding of what net zero actually means, what a net zero commitment looks like, and how we move towards that. So a lot of us are hiding behind our net zero commitments right now, I think. I'm not saying that anybody who has made a commitment is hiding, but it was a very strong call out of COP26 that we need to now start seeing reporting and actual facts coming out about how we're working towards net zero, not just making the commitment and then leaving that sit. So for our end, for scope 3, we've been doing a huge amount of work over the last couple of years, very rightly, on scope 1 and 2, which primarily revolves around our buildings and transport that we own and we have direct control over. And that's a massive infrastructure challenge, especially for somewhere like an airport that has to move slowly on these, and we have to make big bets very early. So that's really challenging. But what occurred to me when I took this position was that accounts for about 8% of our carbon emissions. If we want to actually achieve net zero ever, we have to address the other 92%, which primarily is to do with how we manage landing, how we control flights in and out, how we manage slots, what the kind of planes the airlines are buying, and we have absolutely no control over that. And when we're all talking in different languages, if we're all using different commitments and we're all using different frameworks for reporting. So for me, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive can't come soon enough. It's not to say it's not going to be challenging, or that EcoVadis and CDP and all these other reporting frameworks don't have value, but we need a common language in order to be able to talk more effectively with our stakeholders. And for us, in the aviation to be able to address Scope 3 emissions, which we need to do urgently because of the scale, that common language and transparency is really going to help.
But then, so, Mary-Rose, what does it look like then for your community on the other side who were often fall into the space of being a Scope 3 source to others? I mean, that's a big community for you to bring with you.
Absolutely, and the very large companies are quite developed in their plans in this area, and this was the reason why we developed the Sustainability Academy, was to help smaller businesses to make sure that they don't get excluded from either public procurement or being in the supply chain for large corporates, and that one, they understand what it is they're going to be asked for, or that they're going to have even ask partners what they want in terms of filling in of documentation and compliance. So the purpose was to enable them with the skill set to put in place their own plans, but then also to understand what it is that will be required of them when they fit into somebody else's Scope 3. And there's real challenges there for both large and small companies. You mentioned language and taxonomy, and the number of businesses who have said to me just they don't even understand what the word taxonomy means. Now, if you're not a gardener or from a scientific background, you probably don't. So even the debate is on that. Anybody familiar with European legislation will always know that that's a technical term embedded in things, but it's just one area that word has become popular, where people use different classifications and loads of different things, but don't use the word taxonomy. So I think the language does need to be made more user-friendly so that people can engage, because that is, coming back through all of our surveys, the language in itself is a barrier for people to participate. So ever before they engage in the process, they just find it a daunting process. And then once they know what they're trying to capture and measure, there's then the issue around data, and they don't have software systems that are designed to properly capture what it is they need to capture and interface. So, I know we were talking at dinner last night, and there are lots of different solutions out there, but even just navigating that and trying to find the right software to help you capture data for small and medium enterprises is really, really challenging.
Yeah, and I think that to move it to one of the other big challenges of this space is to get the approval or buy-in of our boards. And John, you'll be glad to know I'm not going to put this question to you. Jeff, you'll be glad to know I'm not going to ask John this. But I'm going to ask you, Andrea, how do you bring your board with you? You know, which comes first? Does the board push sustainability, or do you push it into the board?
I think it has to come both ways. I'm very lucky in the position that I'm in now at DAA that the board actively looked for somebody to take the role that I'm now in. So since I've taken this role, I've had really full support. But I've seen a massive shift even in the last 2 years in terms of senior buy-in and senior urgency around this, and a very strong focus, and also a willingness to put people who are sustainability professionals in a more senior position as well, because it doesn't work from one direction only. It can't be coming from top down expecting everybody else to do the work. It also can't be people, I hate this term, but bottom up, doing all the work and getting frustrated because their senior leaders are either taking the credit or not actually buying into what they're doing. So it really has to come both ways.
But it's probably, it can come from either a desire to do the right thing, a pressure to be seen to do the right thing, or a pressure from the business that you operate in. So it's a challenge.
For me, I'm agnostic as to why.
Yeah.
I don't really care why.
Yeah.
All I care is that if you have a good person or you have good people who are working on sustainability, they will do the right thing. And if the board and senior management are bought into it, then that should be an iterative process that you can work together. So whatever prompts a board to take an interest in this, I don't really.
Well, and it's interesting, Barry, when I looked at your report, that Dave Murphy, I think is your CEO, isn't it?
Yeah.
That Dave is very vocal around this, and has brought the board with him. But in your case, did it morph from the previous looking after your people, the health and safety stuff, into this new space, or how did it come?
Yeah, the journey for us, I've been with my company close to 20 years, and we've always had what was traditionally a corporate social responsibility program. So CSR, community engagement, that was always an exceptionally strong piece, and actually a passion of Dave's, in particular when he became CEO. And but because we work in the engineering and project delivery space, and we have people who are managing construction sites, health and safety and the design of our facilities and the delivery of them in a safe manner is a huge value center. It's been core value of our business model. So health and safety has been a strong theme, people at the center of it. And it's probably from about 2015, the vision was there. I guess you had disruptors like me poking executives going, we need to be looking at this sustainability stuff. Now to them, that just equaled environmental. They didn't make the connection that, the Brundtland definition of sustainability, of social as well as environmental. ESG was a term at the time that was very much stuck in financial investment sector. So, but they had the vision, they did it. I took up the role of group head of sustainability in 2015, and from then you would get little opportunities to sort of talk to the board at their quarterly get-togethers, and you take those opportunities, and you sort of, again, I use the expression, you poke the bear a little bit. You just have to sort of push the boundaries in a polite way, and it was those engagements and show them the really good things that you're already doing, but what our clients are doing, what others are doing, what the trends in the space are, and what we could do, not just in terms of for our clients, but also for ourselves. So, the pitch to become carbon neutral was in 2017, and it wasn't until 2021 that we managed to realise that. The pandemic kind of slowed things down, and because we're engineers, we won't do anything until we are absolutely 100% convinced to a decimal point that it'll happen. So, and I just to go back a question, it's great that we're talking about sustainability in every guise, but in my job, I have to ask that question when I meet a client. When they say, I want to be net zero, I say, well, what do you mean? Language is extremely important, because I could end up delivering a facility that is not to the definition that they want. Net zero, what they actually generally mean is I want to be net zero operationally, which is only scope 1 and 2. So the reality is you actually want to be just carbon neutral. I can't say that to them that way, I might offend them, but that's really what they mean. So the language is exceptionally important, and I think the change of the science-based target net zero standard in last year has upped the sort of game in this whole space. And the quicker we get an ISO standard on language in this space, or a corporate reporting directive that qualifies it all, the better, because when you're delivering buildings for people who want to be net zero or carbon neutral, it does actually make a big difference to what your design might be or how you engage. For example, we are effectively in control of the scope 1 and 2 emissions of our clients, but equally we have a significant say in some of their scope 3, the materials, the embodied carbon, all of that element. So we try to now embrace life cycle assessment as part of our design process. So, it's very important language, and just to sort of take a step back and reiterate that, Andrea.
Yeah, and I think that, Mark, you really set the scene this morning as well when you talked about it's beyond energy sustainability. I mean, it's the whole biodiversity, is the whole ecosystem, and more. I think this is going to come into our space as well. That we're responsible for so much more, and it's so farther out there.
Yeah, and our customers are looking for that. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for direction, and they're happy to now listen to that. Previously, it was, why are you talking to me about biodiversity? Why does my landscaping of my facility matter? So it was all about energy and the cost savings associated with being energy efficient. Now it's about carbon and wider issues. Water recovery is coming into the equation. Biodiversity is starting to be a key part of it. So, yeah, the wider issues are coming in, and so it's only a good thing. Well, whatever you call it, ESG, sustainability, net zero carbon, it's semantics sometimes, but it is important to know the difference.
So I want to just change in the 10 minutes or so we have left. I want to change into what we can do to expand this partnership, because this session is about partnership. And John, I want to ask you how do you look for, how do you partner? What's your sort of criteria for the partnerships? I mean, this fantastic event where Bono and Accelerate Green, the 8 ecopreneurs we're going to hear from today, but how do you pick the ones to partner with? Or how does...
I think I'll leave the partners for today's event to speak for themselves. Course, and I think the event is pretty self-evident as to...
But just in terms of this general...
The general principle. I suppose I remember seeing, I think it's an African proverb, that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Okay? And I think one of the principles we've realized is that the sea change that we've started on our journey couldn't be done alone. Okay? We have the buy-in from the board, the strategy was developed. We have the buy-in from the employees, but outside the organisation, we have the organisations like we have here today that are committed. I think very much seeing a belief in the products, as Barry said there, the want to do this for the right reasons as opposed to the optics. And I think one of the other interesting points there is we're seeing some wonderfully sort of commercially entrepreneurial type bodies here today, and that's where we think about innovation and partnerships. I think it's important maybe we would have relied on and gotten some support from organisations that wouldn't immediately spring to mind when you say the term innovative partnerships. I'm thinking the likes of, say, the European Commission. Okay, very important when they had their coal regions in transition. We engaged with the Commission, we spoke with them, we explained about the peat situation in Ireland and how, rather ironically, due to taxonomy and NACE codes, it wasn't included when they first started looking at moving away from fossil fuel or solid fossil fuel at a European level. With the help of our department, they realised the potential of peatlands in Ireland, but also the fallout if we didn't support the just transition piece as well, and the partnerships around that, the Midlands Regional Transition Team that we worked with, looking at the different regulators, and I know Mark Foley mentioned that. Industry and industry groups are very important in terms of setting the agenda, nuancing some of the legislation that comes in there, offering feedback as to what makes this journey realizable. So I think from that point of view, there's no, again, silver bullet as to what makes a good partner. We have partners of all shapes and sizes that are helping us with our journey and with the broader societal journey that the organisation is on.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and Mary Rose, I mean, the partnership for you, probably you're the voice of your partners almost in terms of, as John said, regulatory and what's coming down the tracks in terms of what we've got to adhere. How do you take that voice and how do you amplify it and how do you deliver it back in?
Well, one is making sure from my point of view that it is a relevant, credible, authoritative voice on behalf of business, and to do that we need to, one, maintain a representativeness across all of the business community and the changing mosaic and makeup of the business community, and then making sure that we have a finger on the pulse. So it's around focus groups, it's around surveys, it's around convening groups like this so that people have a chance to hear, learn, listen and move the conversation on, and then being able to condense that back into policy submissions, policy documents, and maintaining a two-way conversation with policy makers right across all of the relevant departments and right from kind of principal officer through to your ministers. So it's constant lines of communication back and over, constantly back to the members, confirming policy documents, go back out to members for approval and all of that. So it's just making sure that it's constantly reflecting the reality of what the collective of businesses are dealing with and bringing the issues that are bubbling up. So doing that consistently and feeding it back in a usable way to policy makers. So it's learning to speak the language of business, but then translating to that into the language of policy makers. And just going back to what we mentioned earlier about the SDGs, they provide some level of a common language, even if it is aspirational. So we know that all policies developed coming from Europe and domestically are all underpinned by SDGs. Now, they don't find expression in the final document, but it is implicit in it. And if you're not aware of that, then you would go at something in a different way. So it's understanding the ways of working of the policy makers and making sure that you're coming from the same point of view and anchoring your asks, let's say, in the same underpinning values. So it's constantly understanding who you're working with, who you're negotiating with, and also then being that really clear voice for business, because sometimes when it comes to language about just transition, some of the language there can be, I suppose, co-opted in some way by the left and the hard left, that it becomes a very divisive narrative, whereas we would see that, and again it comes out through all of the documents, whether it's in Addis Ababa, Johannesburg, Lima implementation plans of the the SDGs is very much around the force of industry and industrialization as being a progressive force that links back in to some of the other social goals. So, for instance, innovation and a better infrastructure for people can have an impact on other social goals like poverty and that.
But there's probably, I guess part of the challenge is sometimes commercial outfits like ourselves, where we're very much driven, yes, stakeholder capital is a big part of it, but, shareholders are part of that.
Yeah.
And there's a commercial reality, and sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect or could be a challenge about how we interact with the voluntary side. And I'm going to ask you this, and Barry particularly, I'm going to ask you this, that, how do we manage that disconnect where somebody is coming to us with a passion and with an absolute belief, but with no commercial or maybe a disconnected commercial reality? How do we help in that case, sir?
Yeah, I mean, that's particularly sensitive in the space we work in, because most of our clients are, the private sector, pharmaceutical or food companies, and commercially proven is key to selection. And if it's not commercially proven, they're not going to take it on. And if we do get somebody coming to us with that great idea, but it just doesn't have any commercials associated with it, we would have a pro bono side to our business as part of that traditional CSR, that community engagement piece, where we will take our professional engineering. At times, it can be used in that regard to give them some assistance in terms of how you might go about developing this. It's just a pro bono side to our business. We've done it occasionally. It's generally more for designing buildings pro bono, but
yeah, is it technical expertise or mentoring or?
Yeah, mentoring. Yeah, absolutely. It can be more of a mentoring.
And then I'll ask the same question to you then, Andrea. How do you partner back and with the groups that might need our commercial, but need more than our commercial, need that sort of mentoring, that support to get them into the space where their own idea is commercially viable?
I would say traditionally maybe DAA hasn't been the most focused on innovation in that space, but some of the things that we are trying more recently, we have an innovation hub called the Future Factory that we do with Trinity. That's been very much focused on passenger experience and how we can improve the airport, whereas more recently that shifted to being how can we improve sustainability innovation within aviation specifically, so we can lead on that. We've also have a recent partnership between Fingal and DCU as well, focused on sustainable aviation. One of the things that I did when I took this role was I took all of our senior leaders, so there was a big group, for a day and a half and trained them all in sustainable aviation and what the competencies, I suppose, that they need to have in that are, because ultimately, for me, sustainability is my job, but it's everybody's job within the organisation. So my aim was to increase the sustainability literacy across the organisation so that we can identify better and more opportunities for partnership. And I can see the benefits of that already, where people from across very diverse parts of the group are coming back to me and saying, oh, so this partner has an idea, or this stakeholder has an idea, or this person has approached me within the supply chain and this is their concept. What do you think of that, and how is that relevant to our organisation? So it's really ramped up the conversations that we're having internally, the ambition that we can set, and the way that we're approaching it. So was working with partners and creating partnerships. I will, on this point though, just give a shout out to AirGrid specifically. Mark alluded to it earlier, but there's a really strong public sector forum that they're after convening, which is it's quite groundbreaking in Ireland, bringing all the public sector semi-states together in order to collaborate and to share information. I think that kind of collaboration and knowledge sharing opportunity is going to be massively important. The focus of this conference is about acceleration, and within public sector we need to find ways to accelerate rapidly, and we can only do that if we're around the table. This forum is getting us around the table very, very regularly, so kudos to AirGrid. I would like to see more of that in future.
And I guess I'm going to leave the last word on this to you, John, because I mean, we're here today. This is the proof of the power of these partnerships, that we've got these eight eco-pioneers, on stage today. We've got this community here, but this partnership really does do exactly what it says here. It accelerates green, and that's what we need. The world needs that.
Unfortunately, I can't claim credit for the name, I think, and the team, but I think it exactly summarises, to your point, as to what direction and what choice we have at the moment, but to follow that path.
Yeah, thank you, and I want to thank you, John, thank you, Andrea, thank you, Mary Rose and Barry. I think that I just want to leave this that businesses, good businesses, are in this together. This is a problem. This is not something that's not a commercial issue for me or for any of our businesses. This is a problem that we all have to solve together. The heavy lifting will be done by government, but it is heavy lifting, and by the nature of the fact it's heavy lifting, it takes a long time to happen. Now, the reality is that businesses are more agile, they move quicker, and I think that we really step up as businesses in the short term, and we build the groundwork, we make the foundations for governments to do the heavy lifting, in the time to come. So I think that's the real strength of this event today. I want to thank everybody from the panel and look forward to the rest of the session. Thank you.